Hey guys, this is miicrow. I have a checklist for you when you're starting off your expansion journey. This is optimized for getting up to level 65 as fast as possible for those of you who are going to be starting at level 60. And for those of you who are not level 60, you could at least do step 1 of this checklist because the mount specific quest is going to be locked behind level 25. Once you get that mount, that will help you progress your character, get up to level 60, and then from there you can continue with the main story quest because there appears to only be a level 60 gatekeep for the actual expansion content itself. So hopping in here, your mount itself can be obtained by an NPC called Joshi Khan, who is going to give the My Kingdom for a Horse quest. This appears to be starting in Everfall in this north part, but on the PTR there were two different versions that we had, and one of them you started off in Everfall itself on this north part of Everfall, and from there you could actually get the quest. This is, I think, a little bit less likely to be the starting spot, but if it does spawn here, in this like kind of northern region, I believe it was like in the stable area. Uh, you could just set your respawn point to be on the inn. Just teleport to the inn, head over here, get your quest. Then you can take TP to the shrine, which will be right by where Jochi is up here. I believe the shrine that you're looking for is in this region. And then from there, you can just run over, talk to Jochi, you go over here, you kill a dude, you come back, and then you get your horse. That horse will be used to transport you around Eternum a much faster pace than walking typically is. I believe it is up to 5 times faster if you stick on roads, so it's just very worth it, and will speed up your journey like altogether in terms of progressing your character as much as possible. You're again looking for that My Kingdom for a Horse quest wherever that spawns. We have the last location on the PTR, but we don't know if they are going to be changing that, but that appears to be in Everfall and requires level 25. Moving on to step 2 of this kind of journey, we're going to talk about main story quests because that main story quest will get us up to level 65. I don't think you have to get all the way up to level 65 with this main story quest. You're basically just looking to get up to level 64 ideally. If you get higher than that, that's great. If you don't get as far as that, you're going to have to wait on the step 3. But once you get to level 64, you will be able to get to your PvP gear, which will be BIS for PvE and for PvE content. And very early on, I think that is going to be the way to go. In terms of starting the main story quest, this is started by a quest given in Morgraine called the Evasion of Artemis. This quest itself begins as a prerequisite of just being level 60. So as long as you're above level 60, I believe you're going to be able to do this quest. I don't see another prerequisite on here, so it seems like you're going to be able to just start off right off the bat. Talk to Morgraine, who's going to be in that new uh, Evan Scale, or no, sorry, not an Evan Scale, Eden Grove settlement, and you can just talk to her and get to that. There's kind of a outpost area that you can spawn over here. You can run over with your horse that you got from step 1, and then that will let you start this quest itself. And again, this is given by Morgraine, and that is in Eden Grove. Moving on to step 3 of here, we're going to try to get to level 675 PvE gear. I'm going to go a little bit more in depth than the other pieces, but the TLDR is the PvP gear that you actually get is BIS for PvE. It's not BIS for PvP, but it's very good for PvP as well. The reason why it's BIS is because it has health, which is just kind of a must-have perk. It has refreshing, which will just increase the amount of cooldowns that you can cast, which will therefore also increase your damage for most classes. And it also has Enchanted Ward. Enchanted Ward works off of base damage, and most mobs in PvE have very little base damage, which basically means Enchanted Ward is going to get a natural boost because you're going to be warding versus something that the other opponents do not have a lot of defense versus. If you've been watching to any of my videos recently, you've probably seen me say base damage or damage is base damage times weaken times rend times old fort or like old fortify. Uh, the main thing is, from a PvP standpoint, is PvP mobs have 0 base damage. They have a lot of Empower, which is the opposite of Weaken, so Weaken won't be as effective versus them, but will still be very effective. And they effectively are affected a lot by Rend. So base damage and Rend are your two best friends. Weaken is also very good from a PvP or from a PvE standpoint. For PvP, this is kind of the opposite, where PvP people have a lot of base damage. So Enchanted Ward actually won't be very good for PvP. PvP people tend to have a little bit less Weaken, so usually Weaken is a better bucket to go for. And then they tend to have a little bit a more passive fortify as well. So from a PvP standpoint, we try to optimize for weaken. From a PvE standpoint, we try to optimize for base damage reduction. And this Enchanted Ward is the best form of base damage reduction that's going to be currently in the patch for that PvE content because most mobs are doing Enchanted Ward related damage. They will also be doing damage that will be elemental, which is where you'll swap your gems in and out for mutations itself, but in terms of questing, that will not be a concern for you. You just want to get this Enchanted Ward gear. It will have con on it for some of the pieces. Some of the other pieces have strength, so you just get the one that fits your build the most. If you want to build it more towards PvEing, M2 will start at level 675. That's the recommended level, so you can just hop right into that. And typically, you don't want a lot of health for those early on mutations. So that will allow you to get on that path if you go for this PvP perk route to acquire these pieces. Once you acquire these pieces, either by doing the kind of daily new PvP content that's happening at 6, 7, and 8 server time for your region. Then using those tokens, you can get these, or you can do things like OPRs. But you have like a different sources of getting that PvP related experience that's going to be needed for upgrading your artifacts as well. So you need to find some way to do that in the future, even if you are a PvE primary player. And using that, you can buy this gear, which will help you early on from those PvP standpoints and avoid having to overspend for gear that isn't necessarily best in slot for your build early on in New World. Moving on to step 3 or step 4 here, you can get the artifacts and try to get to 700 gear score as soon as possible. That 700 gear score will give you a stat increase, which is why it's really important to get to. You think of it as like old New World, where it was very, very important to get the 600 gear score as much as possible, and this was more important than perks itself because it gave you more stats. It's the same exact situation where you really want to get to that 700 now instead of 600, and it will give you more stats. So even if a gear piece isn't ideal, if it's 700, it is probably better than your original gear piece. I'd even go as far to say as 2 perk quote unquote bis would be better than 3 perk bis, that if that 2 perk bis was 700 and that 3 perk bis was not 700 gear score. So it's something you really need to be looking out for. But in terms of getting that journey itself, there are some changes from the patch notes that have come out that I want to share with you guys. So in terms of mutations themselves, mutations have a passive effect on level 2 and on level 3 called debuffed resilience. This is going to reduce the effectiveness of rends and weakened statuses by 50% and 75%. So 50% would be M2, 75% would be M3, M1s would be perfectly fine, but this basically means that rends and weakens are getting nerfed for PvE itself, which makes that base damage reduction even more important, which is why this PvP gear is really, really good to get because it's a different bucket and the enemy is not going to be able to reduce that for you. There's also things like Grit Ward, which are pretty good, but Grit Ward got nerfed from 4% to 3% per piece, versus this Enchanted Ward will protect versus most mob hits and is at 4%. So you're going to gain an extra 5% damage reduction, which really translates to about if you have a full set of this, about 30 to 40% damage reduction overall, which is very, very good to have on your gear itself and will help you stay alive even with lower cons. In terms of the actual artifacts themselves, artifacts can only drop from the actual mutated expeditions, so trying to rush those expeditions early will not be helpful. In terms of a full artifact list that will be dropping here, here's the list of every artifact that is going to be dropping from an expedition. In terms of noteworthy ones on this list, mag gloves are BIS for Void Gauntlet users. Butcher is a really good kind of ult charging or ult farming sword, I guess, because it applies weakens or sorry, it applies disease. Oh gosh, I can't speak today. It applies a dot, which also has a passive effect on here, which will extend the duration of other dots. And this whirling blade will do a decent amount of damage. You have that keenly jagged applying, and then you have jagged worlds applying as well. So you have multiple dots on that. Would be really good for farming ult charge. It seems like a decent PvE weapon, maybe even viable in PvP. Mjolnir looks like it's going to be really, really good because they added an effect for this where it is going to actually have grit built into that Justice for All ultimate. So we're wrecking, or sorry, yeah, we're wrecking ball feels bad. Next patch. The Warhammer passive from uh what's it called? I honestly forget what the perk is called because no one has used it because it's not been very good till up till this point. Justice for All from Mighty Gavel. Mighty Gavel will actually be like a really good PvP perk, and going for this Warhammer with the Mjolnir will be a good step in that direction to getting something that is basically very, very good for that. In terms of Mjolnir itself, I'm pretty sure this drops from Laz. In terms of the Mag Gauntlets, this drops from Isabella, and the Butcher itself will drop from Dynasty, I believe. So those are all three that you need to be looking out for. The wall is going to be terrible because it will count as an armor artifact, and there's just better ones than that. Inferno, I don't think is going to be good. Blood Drinker got nerfed, but will still be good for support players. So if you're a support player, I would try to get the Blood Drinker. It's going to reduce your damage overall, but it will increase your survivability by a very large margin, and I think that is usually worth it for IGVG players. So if you run Ice Gauntlet, like any magic related thing, or classes that have high base damage will probably consider this at some point. It's a very decent artifact. The Lost Stopwatch is also going to be very good for bow if the leaked artifact bow actually comes to this patch, which will stun targets that are full HP for half a second, because this will increase that stun duration to uh be a whole second, but you will lose 5% base damage for that. It's also just a decent, like, kind of taunting artifact, I guess, that you can get, and you get this from Thwarp. So, but you're going to have to wait for those mutated weeks in order to get these artifacts. That's the part that's noteworthy there. You can't really rush these, and some of them are game changing. Like Mag Gloves, you really don't want to miss that week if you're an IGBG player. Very, very important. Bruisers, you really don't want to miss that last week because Mjolnir is very, very important. So depending on where this first week lies, if we have Tempest in the rotation, you really need to rush that. If you have Laz in rotation, you really need to rush Spark and Mjolnir, and then based from there, just go your ways, find whatever ones are best for your build. But I hope this list is helpful. It's just like a small checklist for you guys to go through. Try to get through, I'd say, Mount, you should be able to get through this day one. Main story quest, this should be day one to day two. It'll probably take a day and a half for most people. Uh, in terms of 675, you probably want this by day 3 to day 5. And then once you get to, in terms of getting the artifacts, you want to be able to get your artifact from the mutation by a day 7, because that will be the rotation. So you should be looking for it to hit this for between day 6 and day 7 to be farming those artifacts, not necessarily at an M3 level, but at least at like an M1 level, which shouldn't be too difficult if you complete the main story, because M1s are 650. Uh, so you only need to hit there. If you want M2s, which will also drop it, that's 675, which is if you get your PvP gear. You could use that PvP gear for that PvE because it's BIS for PvE. And then M3s are 695, so that's going to be a little bit more tricky to get to early on, but I think we'll be able to hit that by uh, maybe week 2 to 3. For the M3 itself, for most players. For tryhards, they'll probably get to the M3 level within like 3 or 4 days, but those are people who decided to take time off work to just grind the expansion, and I don't expect that as a very large majority of the player base that wants to do that. So, but let me know what you guys think. If you have any other tips, please leave them in the comments below for other people. But have fun with the expansion. I will be streaming it on Twitch when I get off of work, but unfortunately I can't really be home for when it launches itself. So I'll see you guys then, and have fun with it.